Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the best insert card designs of 1990. This year was fun when you were seeing the transition from the 1980s to the 1990s, and it was really great to see the ideas that were coming forth for these in the inserts to really see kind of where we were going. There were a couple of sets that basically were hanging on to the 1980s for all it was worth, and there were a couple of companies that were really branching out and making some fun designs. Ironically, the 1991 didn't show a massive improvement in the design of insert cards, which is kind of a strange thing. So some of these cards are really, they don't really have good follow-ups. So it's fun to look at these cards primarily because there was an amazing amount of creativity that just kind of burst forth, and we got to see some fun results from that weren't necessarily part of a path. And that's kind of the way that just about all of these cards, the cards I'm going to be looking at here, it's just about the way that all of those worked out. And I'm not talking about the stuff I'd already talked about from the 1980s. So Topps did really great all-star cards, but they started that in the early to mid 80s, and they just never designed the card any different because it was a great card design. So there's no reason to talk about it now. Likewise with the Upper Deck holograms, they're great in 89, they're great in 1990. The small size didn't really work too well. In 1991, when they made it a full-size card, that worked a whole lot better. It made the card feel better in terms of just the way that it worked. So it was more fun, but it's the same thing. So I talked about it in 1989. There's no reason to go into it anymore. That being said, for the honorable mention, I actually do want to talk about Upper Deck holograms. It's just I want to talk about the hockey version. And the hockey version wasn't really a version. This is something that they created in 1990-91, and then it didn't really work, so they made a different version of it with football, but they never bothered to get back to this really until about 1993-94 as they were getting into their Hall of Views. That was really kind of when they got back into this because the technology caught up. So the problem with the hockey card, the holograms from the hockey card set, is they're too ambitious and they didn't quite work. I did a box review of this set, and in it I have no idea how to read the cards. They look really bad because they when the lighting isn't good, like here I use these big lights. When you have that kind of light, you can't see the hologram. You can't see the hologram on the back of the cards. You can't see these, and so it looked really terrible. It wasn't until I got a point light, which is what you need to use. Once I got that, all of a sudden I saw there's a really, really impressive hologram in this. I mean, really impressive. It's got a good amount of range, it's got a good amount of depth. It doesn't have a lot of clarity, but the big problem with it is that it doesn't just appear and then disappear. It actually fuzzes in and fuzzes out. You got to get it just right. And the motion as it rotates around is very quick. So it is a problematic hologram because they did as much as they could. They did more than they were able to do, and it suffered. So I love what they were doing. I just don't think they were successful at it. And so it's not a card to enjoy. It's a card to respect. It's a card to appreciate. It's not a card to enjoy. So that's where I got to put it. I think it deserves to be on this list. It just doesn't, it's not one of the top 5. So with the top 5, I need to start off at number 5 with the Baseball Fleer All-Star cards. These cards are, this is just about as good as Fleer could possibly get with card design. In this case, they had a very well structured, well designed card. It's very clean, very well presented. They have a good use of space and detailing. They have good colors. The way that everything comes together really does read in a good way. It's not a glossy card yet. They hadn't gotten around to doing that. So it still had the kind of the matte finish that we were used to from the 80s. But the card does look good. And on the card back, I think the card back's pretty decent. So here, basically what we have is, this is the 1980s telling us what the 1990s were going to do. This was showing us that the 1990s were going to be very well designed, very well thought out. This was, you were going to have to be on your game, and this card was showing that. So this is a great card from the transition from the 80s to the 90s, but this is the 80s side. This is the 80s looking forward to the 90s saying this is going to be great. which is great. I mean, it really is a great card design for us, mainly for Fleer. Fleer had some fun, edgy cards, but they'd never done a really, really clean card, one that was just beautifully designed in a very healthy and respectful way. This one is exactly that. So, really good. Now, there are 4 cards that I like a whole lot better, but this is a great start. And for number 4, I'm going with Upper Deck's very first insert card, which is the Reggie Jackson Heroes cards. Yes, they've done the 1 per pack holograms, but this was an actual insert set. These are all numbered. They're intended to work that way. And this was the first time they did their Heroes sets, which they would do year after year. Part of the reason I love this card is because it does kick off the Heroes cards, which is a great legacy that they had. But they also, right out of the gate, they designed the whole structure of how it would work, and it would work really well in terms of 9 cards per player plus a header. And so you have 8 cards that are looking at the history of the player, and then you have a 9th card, which is a cool art card with, on the back, a checklist. Great combination, and it gives you the ability to line these up player after player after player in a way where it works so well. But while all these cards worked in the same way, the designs were varying as they went through the years. And here in 1990, I think that they had their best card design. Now, there are probably better card designs overall, just in terms of better done cards. But here, in this case, they have a couple of things going on that I love. They have it's kind of like a baseball space in the middle, a big hole in the middle, which gives the whole card a kind of a nostalgic feel. It doesn't look like an old card from back when they didn't know how to design cards. It feels like it's a traditional card from the past, carrying on the baseball tradition. Great move. I like the color. The color also works with that to have kind of a nostalgic quality to it. But again, not old. It's kind of cutting edge. It's just a retro feel to it. And then they have the fake autograph on these cards. Now, it was really cool they did actual autographs in packs, but having this fake autograph, again, it continues with that. And so here you have a modern card that just feels like it's the tradition of this legendary player who was ending his career. And the whole combination, I think, is really, really successful. On top of that, Upper Deck didn't know yet how to make good card designs. They were really struggling at that, and this card just came shining right through. On the front, on the card back, unfortunately, they had a ways to go. I like what they were trying to do, but it was a big failure. And I mean, that's just where Upper Deck was at. So I think that they kind of overachieved on the front and stumbled into a beautiful card design, and they'd have to get around to the back later on. But with Upper Deck, let's face it, it would take them years to learn how to make a really good card back. So, good start, but yeah, great card fronts. For number 3, I'm going with Pro Set Super Bowl MVPs. This is a card set where they did the exact same design as they did for the main cards, where they have the strip on the top, 2 strips on the bottom, but in this case they use silver on either side. They still have the metallic quality to it, the speckly metallic finish that you would see in Hoops and in Skybox. Here they were using it in their Pro Set cards, but they also have a color band just above that, and the color band becomes really strong contrasted to the silver, and then they have art in the middle. They still have the full bleed, but the full bleed doesn't really matter here because of the art. But the strength of the card, while the card looks great, card on the front, the card on the back, the silver with the team color on it, great combination. The big strength though here is the art. The art is fantastic. Now, the Don Russ art over the years, I was never a fan of that. I always kind of respected it, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's really not great art. In this case, it is great. And on top of that, this is the kind of art that really fits for football. Now, you saw this in like pro magazines. There are places that you saw this kind of art. The art is gritty, and you feel the weight of the game. You feel like this is late in the game's winding down, and these players are either going through the last motions or they've finished their performance and they're just waiting for the other side of the team to finish off the game. That's the feeling that you get with these cards, and so you really feel the structure of the game. You feel the weight of it, the performance, and the exhaustion that comes through. That kind of thing is great for a football fan. So the art looks great and it feels great too. Great combination. Now, as much as I like that, I really do like good card designs. So for number 2, I'm going to have to go back to Fleer with Fleer's Football All-Pro cards. Now, with the baseball set, the All-Star Baseball cards, I talked about how this was basically the end of the 80s moving into the 90s. Well, this was the 90s coming out of the 80s. This was the other side of that spectrum. This is a card that impressively uses that same metallic finish that you would see in Hoops and in Skybox, and like I said, was also used in the Pro Set cards. But this was a thing that Fleer did right out of the gate. This wasn't copying anybody. This was basically the concept they came up with. Now, they were launching back into football for the first time since the 1960s, but only for doing player cards. They'd been doing football cards since the mid-70s. So this was basically a transition point where they went from just kind of churning out cards to taking it seriously. And while I'm not a fan of the way that the main cards came out, these cards were super overachieved. The way that they designed these cards, you can see a lot of the influence from this year and the previous year's All-Star cards. The way that they have the whole finish on the background as kind of a counterpoint. They have a lot of space on it, and the space they use either as a void or as some kind of an effect. In this case, they used it as an effect of the, not quite silver, it's almost a pewter in a way, but kind of a silver speckly effect in all around it, which makes the card feel really, really high end and really exciting. But they also have a really well-designed card, just all the intricate detailing on it. This is one where they sat down and they actually really took the time to make something that was well-structured. And as we learned from George Carlin, football is all about rules. Well, that actually is true, and it fits with football cards. When you look at the different sports, each one of the sports, the cards have a different feel because the way that the sport feels is different. And in football, one of the big qualities of football is that it is an intricate game and it is structured. And Fleer was doing a really good job with that. So they have great detailing in here and wonderful, wonderful colors. The card back would need some work, but actually it's not too bad for what Fleer was doing at this time, so I got no problem with that. But the card front here, ironically, I don't think that anything in 1991 even matched this level. In 1992, yes, we would start seeing that, but for this card, it was a shot out of the dark it showed that while with the main set, Fleer had a ways to go, with inserts, Fleer was on point. They were ready for it. They were taking it serious. They were going to be a force to reckon with, and love it. Thank you. But it's not quite number 1. And for me, for number 1, I go back to Pro Set for their Super Bowl theme art. This is not, basically whenever there's a Super Bowl, there's an official theme art that's created, and they put it on the programs. Well, for Pro Set, they decided to show all of the Super Bowls with this theme art. The previous year, they showed the logo. Here in 1990, they showed the theme art, but they didn't bother to do the bleed, which really didn't make sense because of the proportions of the art. So they actually framed it entirely in silver. So in 1990, this is the card that's done with a full border. And with the silver effect on it, great, does a great job of framing it. But beyond that, some of this art is magnificent. Now, some of the art's pretty clunky, but like in this case, oh, this is a nice. I mean, really, I would say that well over half of the art is good to great, but there is a surprising number of these that, well, I guess it's not surprising because this is the art for each Super Bowl, but some of these, oh man, are fantastic. And the speckly silver border does a phenomenal job of really highlighting and enunciating and beautifully framing each one. So these cards, I remember as a kid when, as this was one of the sets I started out with, looking at these cards, just staring at it. And then on the card back, you get to read about the game, but probably the biggest strength of these cards, really at the end of the day, is that on the back, you have the Super Bowl ring. That, for me, it was a great research thing, not so much to memorize as much as you get to really get a feel for the importance of the game and the celebration of winning one of these games. So they did this for all the Super Bowls, and they got to show off what each one of those rings was like for every single Super Bowl. Great card design. The design itself was great. The art, phenomenal. The ring on the back, love it. to me, this is the best that these cards had in 1990. And even for people who don't like Pro Set in 1990, I have a feeling that we're all going to agree that this was great. Maybe not your favorite, but definitely in the top 3 should be for pretty much everybody. Incredible cards. Personally, I think that it is very comfortably in number 1. It just owns the number 1 position. And again, it's tough competition even for 1991 to be able to reach up to this level. Phenomenal point. So that's my take on the best insert card designs of 1990. I'm curious to see what your take on this is, where you think I'm, basically how you read it. And definitely check out my other videos if you haven't had a chance. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And thank you very much for watching.